It is Thursday, December 1st here in Draft Shark Studios in Rochester, New York. Welcome to our Week 13 preview podcast. I'm your host, Matt Schauf. With me, as always, Jared Smola. Jared, how's the week going for you now that we're back to like normal stuff, not a holiday?
Yeah, back into the routine, which I love. A couple teams on bye week, which helps. And a good Thursday night game this week. Not an amazing fantasy game, but a good real life game. Better than we've had a lot of these Thursday nights.
And really, it could be a better fantasy game than we might expect based on how Josh Allen has performed against the Patriots recently. So we'll jump into that game first. We're back to going through every game now that we are back to a regular week and only two teams on bye. It's we got one more 6-team bye. I'm not sure why the NFL did a 6-team bye for week 14, other than to just, I don't know if they're just like letting us fantasy folks know that they're still in charge or what, but it's annoying.
I've read some stuff about the process they go through to make the schedule. I'm not gonna knock them at all because it's tough.
I'll knock.
I don't know if okay. I'll let you handle it.
Yeah, I'll do the knocking for both of us. I don't mind that at all. Buffalo at New England is the first game on Thursday night. Bills by 4 in this one, over under 43.5. And like I said, Josh Allen has laid waste to the Patriots recently, and we might be ready to do so again. Full practices all this week. He had not done that since injuring that right elbow against the Jets in week 9. The passing has not been awesome over the past 4 weeks, which began with that Jets game. Of course, he didn't hurt the elbow until the end of it, but the Jets have been a tougher matchup to pass on. Over that span, 6.75 yards per attempt, 61% completions. Before that Jets game, 8.3 yards per attempt, 65.5% completion. So I'm hoping that we get full Josh Allen in this game against a team that he's just beaten up recently.
Yeah, both these teams, not on a short week because they both played on Thanksgiving. You had the wind game last year between the Bills and the Pats, but the Bills didn't punt in either of their other two games against the Patriots. I think it was week 17 game and then the playoff game. They scored 80 points across those two games. Josh Allen threw 8 total touchdowns. So it is it's a tough on paper matchup. The Patriots defense has been good all year, good lately. They're third in pass defense DVOA over the past 5 weeks now. But yeah, you're not benching Josh Allen in this spot, and I think you're starting all your regular Bills.
Josh Allen might be the most they don't play the game on paper player in the entire league. So Gabe Davis, obviously the obvious ones are there. Gabe Davis, Dawson Knox. You think they're fairly easy starters tonight?
Yeah, Davis I'd start. We talked about his target share being up lately, and he still has the big playability. Obviously, it'd be tough to watch him go for one of his 2 touchdown games tonight on your bench. Knox is iffier. I think he's fringy. His routes were fine last week. 76% of the dropbacks, just the 2 targets. It seemed to me like Isaiah McKenzie kind of took some of the Dawson Knox work, which is kind of how it's going to be. Like we know Steph Diggs and Gabe Davis are going to be the 2 primary options in this pass game. Then it might vacillate back and forth between Knox and McKenzie. McKenzie did have one big game against the Patriots last year. Knox did well against the Patriots last year too, though. Scored 3 touchdowns in those final 2 meetings, omitting that game in the crazy wind in Buffalo. So I would lean towards Knox being the third option in the passing game tonight. But again, I would not be surprised if it's McKenzie again.
Yeah, McKenzie had the monster week 16. Then in the playoffs, he didn't do very much. It was just kind of a normal game. Last week, his playing time was way up versus the previous game, but it was right in line with the 2 games before that. So, I think both of those guys are kind of on that fringe of if you need somebody, there's definitely upside to them, but don't overrate the likelihood that they're going to score for you.
Exactly.
Devin Singletary, 6 straight games of 72% snap rate or better, 13 plus carries in 5 of those 6 games, and 67 rushing yards or more in 4 of those games. The targets have been down over the same stretch, but it looks like I don't know if it's luck or plan or whatever. It doesn't look like a change in his usage, though.
Yeah. Singletary's Singletary. He's out there. He's not a focal point of the offense because it's a Josh Allen-centric offense. The Patriots, first in adjusted fantasy points allowed to running backs on the season. They're also first in Football Outsiders run defense DVOA over the past 5 weeks. So, Singletary sits lower in our rankings than he does most weeks because of the matchup. He's fine. He's going to be out there for what should be, a high-scoring offense, but I don't love this spot for him.
Yeah, it's going to be like 93% pass for the Bills tonight, I think.
Should be.
On the Patriots side, no Dameon Harris because of a thigh injury. Ramondre Stevenson, I think that makes him a must start. There is an issue for the New England offense. They've already got Isaiah Wynn ruled out, one of the tackles. Trent Brown was added to the injury report today as questionable with illness. So it will certainly hurt if they're missing both of their season opening starting tackles. Not sure that that would ultimately change a whole lot for me in how much I use Ramondre Stevenson.
No, yeah, I do think Stevenson's a must start. I think he's third among running backs in our PPR rankings. He has averaged 15.4 carries and 6.4 targets in the 5 games that Dameon Harris has missed all or most of this season. I think that's a pretty fair projection for what you're going to get out of him tonight. The passing game usage has just been crazy high all season. So, yeah, the tackle thing is a concern, probably a bigger concern for the passing game, though.
And if you look at the Bills defense, it looks like they're tough against the run, but they've allowed 5.0 yards per carry to running backs over the past 5 games. And they lost Von Miller the last time out, who is their second highest graded run defender, according to Pro Football Focus. So it's not a scary run defense, even if there are the tackle injury issues. Mac Jones is not somebody that I'm starting outside of a super flex league, and maybe not even there, depending on what I have. But I'm interested to watch Mac Jones in this game and a little beyond this. He's coming off not only the big game on Thanksgiving night, but his actual 2 best passing performances of the year. The one before against the Jets is a little less obvious because he didn't put up huge fantasy numbers, but he completed 85% of his throws for 9.1 yards per attempt against the Jets.
Yeah, he also had his best PFF passing grade of the season last week. He only had 2 higher marks all last season. So yeah, I'm intrigued. Like he'd be a stash guy for me in deeper leagues. I think he's only in playing two quarterback super flex leagues tonight. But yeah, if he turns in another solid performance, and now he has some more favorable matchups coming up, so he could be an option down the stretch.
And I would even state it more strongly than favorable matchups. He has the league's best QB schedule from week 14 to week 17 by our adjusted fantasy points allowed. Those specific matchups: Arizona, Las Vegas, Cincinnati, Miami. The Cardinals, Raiders, and Dolphins rank 3rd, 2nd, and 4th, respectively, in adjusted points allowed to quarterbacks. The Bengals, a little bit tougher, but they have played worse in pass defense since the injury to their lead cornerback and their shootout potential to that game. So if Mac Jones is at least good tonight, and by good, like if he finishes this game with 250 yards and 1 touchdown and, a passer rating of 90 something, I'll take that, and I'll consider him an option where he's going to be, at least in the mix for the top 18, and we'll see about specifics beyond that going forward.
Yeah, the Cardinals and Raiders games are away too, which I like because they'll be, in domes and climate controlled environments, and then the Dolphins games in Miami. So, weather shouldn't be an issue for a Mac Jones down the stretch here. So definitely a good guy to stash. The schedule also helps these wide receivers. I think Jacoby Meyer's still the only one in play tonight. Even he's iffy because he has the shoulder that limited him on Thanksgiving. It kept him limited in practice all week. He's actually still listed as questionable. So he was okay in the games versus the Bills last season. Actually caught 6 balls in both of the final 2 games without the weather. But he's a low upside option to begin with. Then the shoulder definitely adds some risk to him tonight. So I would try not to use Myers if I could help it.
Of course, limited practices and questionable tags they tell us less in New England than they do anywhere else. That just tells us that he has an injury that he's dealing with.
For sure.
I think he's fine in like low wide receiver 3 range. Not somebody I'm reaching to use, but I hope that I hope he hears something leading into the game. I don't expect to, but he's somebody that I wouldn't be scared to use.
Yeah, he downplayed the injury after that Thanksgiving night game, but
and did return.
He did return. The shoulder stuff though tends to be like, you land on it the wrong way one time and you're knocked out for the game. So he has more risk tonight than he usually does.
Yeah, there is definitely risk. Tough to say. Like, I think we're expecting that he'll be active. Even if he turned up inactive, I'm not even sure exactly how I would react to that. If there's anybody else really worth starting in most cases, Nelson Aguilar was the guy who got the targets last week, got 8 of them, but that was more than his combined total for the previous 5 games. Devontae Parker had 80 yards on 4 catches, but only 4 targets. So I think we'll go ahead and bet the under on that kind of efficiency most weeks. Mm-hmm. Hunter Henry, even 5 targets last week, 3 for 63 and a touchdown. He had just 2 multi-catch games among the past 5. So there's just nobody that I'm like, I want to bet on him.
Yeah, it was the Patriots' best passing performance of the season, and that kind of lifted all these guys. So I'm keeping an eye on it. Devontae Parker and Nelson Aguilar were top 2 in pass routes last week, so they do look like the wide receivers you want to own outside of Jacoby Myers. But again, I'd want to see it again before trusting them in a fantasy lineup at this point of the season.
Parker is the one that I'm going to keep an eye on for potential use later in the season in a deeper league because he got back to full playing time against Minnesota after dealing with an injury and was up in that range beforehand, had some games where he was productive. So there's room for him to produce in like wide receiver 4 range the rest of the way.
Yeah, that Hunter Henry, 76 and 74% of the pass routes over the last 2 games. Now he had just 1 target in week 11 prior to the 5 last week. And the Bills have remained tough against tight ends. So Henry's another guy where, maybe, especially in like FFPC leagues, if he's available, maybe you stash him because if he's going to be a, 70 to 80% route guy down the stretch, he could be usable in those better matchups. But I would not use him in this spot tonight.
Yeah, agreed. Anything else from that game?
Nope.
Pittsburgh at Atlanta, which was a pick 'em at least the last time I checked, over under 42 in this one. Since the week 9 bye, we've got 3 straight positive rushing DVOA ratings for the Steelers offense, which has not been good running the ball overall for the season. So that's particularly noteworthy. It's the first time this year, actually, that they've strung together 3 straight positive DVO ratings in offensive rushing. So now they've got this matchup coming off their best rushing DVOA of the entire season against a tough Colts run D. And we don't know if Najee Harris is going to play.
Yeah, I am betting on Harris not playing. He didn't practice on Wednesday. His injury reportedly isn't serious. So I don't expect a long-term absence, but I'm not banking on him playing on Sunday. Yeah, Jaylen Warren back to a full practice with his hamstring on Wednesday. So it does look like he's going to be available. So it's going to be Warren, Snell, and Anthony McFarland in this plus matchup. I do think Warren's the best bet, but I think we also don't know exactly what the backfield split's going to look like.
Yeah, we don't know. I agree on Najee Harris front. I think we should assume that he's not going to play. He was ruled out quickly from that game, and it was still competitive on Monday night. Jaylen Warren would certainly be the guy that I bet to dominate might be too strong a word. I think that there is strong potential that he dominates the backfield work in this one. I would at least bet him as the clear leader in this backfield because these other 2 guys didn't exist before Monday night when Jaylen Warren was inactive and then Najee Harris got hurt. So I think that they're going to be, just bit players and that Jaylen Warren's going to be the guy that flirts with 18 to 20 total touches for this game, maybe even beyond that. And Pittsburgh's gone 60-40 pass for the season, but in their 2 wins over the past 3 games, they've been over 50% run in each of those. So if they are able to get an early lead on Atlanta, or even if it's just a close game, which it should be, I think that there will be more rushing share versus what they're running on offense overall.
Yeah, I think the nice thing about Warren is he should be a safe bet to handle most of the pass catching work because he's been doing that anyways. Exactly how the early down stuff is going to be divvy, we don't know. But again, the matchup's good. I think you're right. The Steelers, should be able to run it more in this game. They actually have been. They were -8% pass rate over expected 2 weeks ago, and then -6% last week. So they have been wanting to run the ball more than average. And if this game is close, obviously, or they are playing with the lead, they'll be able to do that.
Mm-hmm. The wide receivers on that side remain limited though by Kenny Pickett. He had a solid outing against the Colts, 71% completion rate, but the 87.5 passer rating is his highest of the season, just 174 yards in that game, 6.2 yards per attempt. So, I mean, even when he's good, he's just limited.
Yeah, it's like Pickens has been efficient, but isn't getting great volume. He's actually averaging just 5 targets per game over the last 5. And then you have Deontay Johnson, who's getting the volume, 7.4 targets over the last 5 games, but has not been efficient. So both those guys are like low-end wide receiver 3s. The matchup's good, obviously. So that helps a little bit.
Mm-hmm. Pickett, by the way, has has as many touchdown runs as touchdown passes. I had to find the spot in my notes. Pat Freiermuth, against the Colts, 3 catches, 39 yards. But he remains a stronger bet for production, probably because he plays at a position where we need a little bit less for him to be a strong option than the wideouts.
Yeah, target share down last week, but playing time was still there. So nothing to worry about with Freiermuth.
Green Bay at Chicago, Packers by 4.5, over under 43.5. Quarterback injuries are the big stories in this game. Aaron Rodgers, it's an upside spot for him against a defense that might be the worst in the league right now. But he's not only been not very good all season, now he's got some kind of internal injury. Tough to know exactly what it is. I think it's a great week to play both Packers running backs and try not to play Aaron Rodgers.
Yeah, that'd be my lean. I mean, like you said, the matchup is awesome. The Bears defense has been bad all season. It's been even worse lately. They're dead last in Football Outsiders pass defense DVOA over the past 5 weeks. They've allowed 9.4 yards per pass attempt over the last 5 weeks. And their last 3 games have come against Jared Goff, Marcus Mariota, and Mike White. So it's not like they faced this, tough group of quarterbacks. So I would not be surprised if Rodgers comes away with this game with 2 or 3 touchdowns. But the downside is he's playing through the injury, and this is a game where Green Bay's been a run-leaning offense all season, anyways, and that's definitely going to continue on Sunday in this matchup.
Yeah, I mean, if you have to use him, that's fine. I'm not going to go hunting for somebody to replace him, but I would bet that Green Bay would like to finish this game with 20 pass attempts and come away with a victory where they run the ball 35 times.
Yep, agreed.
Christian Watson he's one of those guys that you have to decide whether you're going to play, because I'll get to Jamal Williams' numbers later in this, but he's the Jamal Williams of wide receivers right now. 41.4% of Watson's PPR points have come from touchdowns, which includes 1 rushing touchdown so far. That's 10 percentage points ahead of anybody else in the top 50 at wide receiver in PPR scoring. Next on that list is Isaiah McKenzie. So if Christian Watson doesn't score, he's not a good bet to get you points. That said, he's going up against, like, as we stated, maybe the worst defense in football right now, especially against the pass. So the upside is clear.
Yeah, I'd be inclined to just kind of ride the momentum with Watson this week in this matchup again. The downside is the passing volume is going to be low for the Packers likely. Now, Watson does have a 19% target share over the past couple weeks. He trails Allen Lazard by just 2 total targets over that span. Watson's basically a full-time player at this point. He ran her out on 89% of the dropbacks last week. So, that's all working in his favor. Again, I would not be surprised if he scores or at least makes another big play in this matchup against the Bears.
Yeah, nice to see him lead the team in targets last week. That helps the case a little bit. Anyone else worth going over on the Green Bay side?
No, I know we kind of alluded to AJ Dillon, but I mean, he's been disappointing. But if there's a spot to use him, I think it's this week. I think he should get the double-digit carries, and he should be efficient in this matchup.
Mm-hmm. On the Bears side, we'll see about Justin Fields, and it's the injury question with him. We'll just see how the practice week goes. I'm not playing anybody besides David Montgomery if Justin Fields doesn't play, and I would love to not have to play anybody besides Montgomery, even if Fields does play. I would play Fields if he's active for the game. Yeah. But besides that, I'm not looking at any pass catchers unless I need to.
Yeah, I think we're staying away from the wide receivers for now. I mean, Chase Claypool obviously has a big opportunity with Darnell Mooney out for the season now. Mooney leaving behind 27% of the Bears' targets. I do think Cole Kmet has to be in play. He's already seen 24.5% of the Bears' targets over the last 4 games, 5.8 targets over that span, and he, could get a further boost with Darnell Mooney out. So, still not a guy I'm excited to play, but volume-wise, Kmet is pretty solid outside the top few tight ends.
I agree. Do you think he drops from his current spot in our rankings if it is Trevor Siemian instead of Justin Fields?
Maybe a little. I guess you'd have to decide like Dawson Knox tonight versus Cole Kmet. They're just completely different players, all right? Like Kmet's more of the floor play. Knox gives you the upside, so that's kind of a decision you'd have to make.
I mean, if I'm deciding between those guys, I'm probably just rolling with Knox going forward. And you keep Kmet on the bench because I wouldn't drop him unless you're in a league where that kind of guy can just stay on the waiver wire because you don't want to help anybody else. But yeah, I think I'd roll with just the upside offense.
Yep, no argument here.
Denver at Baltimore, Ravens by 8.5, over under 38.5. So it should be an ugly game. We'll start with Denver. Latavius Murray dominated backfield playing time, unsurprisingly, in week 12 because they just dumped Melvin Gordon. 49 snaps for Murray versus 10 combined for Marlon Mack and Devine Ozigbo. Ozigbo's back to the practice squad or just on waivers now. I haven't seen if they completed that move, but Mike Boone designated to return this week. So we'll see if that means that he's activated or if it's just opening the practice window. I think Mike Boone's going to be a factor at some point. The question will be how much of a factor.
Yeah, I think a factor for Denver, not necessarily a fantasy factor. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, well, I mean, a factor for Denver primarily, and then how much of an impact he is versus Latavius Murray and workload.
Right. Yeah, I do think Boone could step back into the pass catching role, which would be bad news for Murray, considering this is a Broncos team that's going to be trailing for most of the season going forward. The Broncos have a 15.5 point implied total this week. It's the lowest on the entire week. So that, kind of tells you what to do with this offense. The Ravens too, this defense is third in total defensive DVOA over the past 5 weeks now. They're playing very well against both the run and the pass. So, Murray in play because of the workload, Cortland Sutton in play because of the volume he's been getting. Otherwise, I would, try to stay away from this offense.
Yeah, toughest defense in the league by DVOA in recent weeks. So I would certainly try not to play anybody Denver. Greg Dulcich is somebody that I am thinking about every week, and the playing time and the routes remain good. He's got one game of more than 5 targets, though. He has 52 total yards over the past 3 games. Last week, he trailed the top 3 wide receivers among Broncos in routes against Carolina, and that was with Jerry Jeudy and KJ Hamler out. So he was behind Kendall Hinton and Brandon Johnson in routes. Again, the playing time was fine, but it's a bad offense. The targets aren't there. It's just time to not bet on Greg Dulcich in those close decisions now.
Yeah, I'm with you there. I mean, the target thing can flip in any week, but it's like, why wait on that in such a bad offense where, like, even if it does flip and he gets an 18% target share one of these weeks, like, it's probably going to be 4 catches for 40 scoreless yards. I just think the risk outweighs the reward with Dulcich right now.
Yeah, and we're at the point in the season where it's, if you haven't seen it, I mean, and we've got like 1 or 2 games of worthwhile targets from a rookie tight end. If you haven't seen it, then it's just not worth waiting on something that you don't know if it really exists. On the Baltimore side, we're going to have to watch Lamar Jackson. He left Wednesday's practice with a quad injury, so we'll watch and see how serious that is this week. Have you heard anything since then about it?
Nothing today, but like you said, it sounds like he, hurt the quad in Wednesday's practice, which is definitely concerning, and especially for a quarterback like Lamar Jackson, who gets a lot of his fantasy production with his rushing ability.
Mm-hmm. I'm not worried about Mark Andrews' disappointing week 12. His role was the same as usual. I think it was just one of those goofy games where Josh Oliver looked more attractive than usual.
Well, Andrews played horribly. He dropped what would have been like a 40-yard catch, and he dropped a touchdown. So, he could have had 100 yards in a score pretty easily. I would bet on him bouncing back. He'll be fine.
J.K. Dobbins designated to return. We'll see how soon he's actually activated to the roster, and we'll see about the role once he's back. I would have to assume that it will be limited at the very least right when he comes back, and maybe through the end of the season.
Yeah, that'd be my guess too. Like, I wouldn't be counting on Dobbins contributing to fantasy teams the rest of the way. I think the impact, though, is on Gus Edwards, who I think is a starting option. Definitely if Dobbins is out, maybe if Dobbins is active, but we'll have to see what we hear about the workload split. Gus Edwards, he's only played 2 healthy games this season, but he has 16 carries in both of those games. And this Broncos run D, as we've talked about, has been slumping. It's not a tough matchup for Gus Edwards. So I think RB3 for Edwards, if Dobbins is out, it becomes a bit shakier if Dobbins is back for Sunday's game. But again, we'll see what we hear about the workload split.
Now, interestingly, in the 3 games since the bye for Denver, the defense rates 31st against the pass in DVOA, 11th against the run. I don't think that really matters for this particular matchup because I don't think Denver's going to score points. So I don't think Baltimore's going to be pushed away from running the ball. So I do think it's a good spot for Gus Edwards, but I'll be curious to see if this pass defense rebounds at all, because the Denver pass defense was like the one thing Broncos that we could actually count on before these past 3 weeks. And then just since the bye, it's disappeared.
Yeah, we're to the point of the season where you start having to think about teams, maybe not giving 100% when their seasons are over. That could certainly be the case with this Broncos team.
Especially that team. And getting back to the Ravens in particular, the wideouts, I think, are still bit players. You'll still find DeMarcus Robinson, Devin Duvernay way down our rankings. And really, if you're in a league deep enough where you have to decide between them, I think it's really a coin flip between them.
Yeah, if you're deciding, I'd still go Robinson. Just, he's been getting more targets generally over the past 3 or 4 games. It was awesome to see Deshaun Jackson make a big play last week. He's not going to be a fantasy factor, but I do think he's going to be a factor in this Ravens offense down the stretch. The receiver core is bad, and they need that big playability. And Jackson can still run. Amazing. He's like 35 years old. He can still get downfield like that.
You can at least give him a look if you're playing showdowns when the Ravens are involved.
Yes.
Washington at the Giants, Commanders by 2.5, over under 40.5. It was fun to have Brian Robinson Jr. week. I don't think he's somebody we should bet on significantly going forward. That was the first game all season where he was over 3.8 yards per carry. And even that number 2 game, 3.8 yards per carry, was against Houston the week before, one of the league's worst run defenses.
Yeah, I mean, the rushing volume has been steady for him. He's actually averaging 18 carries over his last 4 games, but he hasn't been efficient. He doesn't do a whole lot. in the passing game. And this is a decent spot for him that, Washington's favored. It should be a close game throughout. I think Robinson, can get to 15 plus carries again, but running back 3, no more than that for Robinson.
Yeah, we still have Antonio Gibson ahead of him, even though it swung in Robinson's favor last week. I would still play Gibson first. Nobody exciting on the Washington side. I think Terry McLaurin's in play all the time at this point, and Taylor Heineke is not, if you can help it.
Yeah, just McLaurin for me. Curtis Samuel's role has diminished lately. Logan Thomas is very fringy. Matchup's good for Logan Thomas. The Giants are dead last in Football Outsiders tight end coverage, DVOA. But, the volume's just not there because Washington's going so run heavy.
On the Giants side, do we have problems with Saquon Barkley?
I think so, unfortunately. His playing time is down a little bit recently. So it's been over the last 4 games, and he's still playing 78% of the snaps over the last 4 games. He's still 5th in expected fantasy points over the last 4 games. So, the usage is still fine. It's not quite at the level it was over the first couple months of the season. But the efficiency, 3.3 yards per carry, 4.3 yards per catch for Saquon. He's 21st in actual fantasy points per game over the past 4 weeks. You're probably not benching him. But he's not the elite option he was over the first couple months of the season.
Yeah, it's one of those, what am I going to do about it? You're probably not benching Saquon Barkley unless you're absolutely loaded at running back. And there's really only been a few games of truly rough production. The past 2 weeks have seen his carries dip. So still somebody worth betting on overall. Not a great matchup this week, but he has stayed involved in the passing game. So, we'll cross our fingers and hope that Saquon can get us across the finish line. Maybe use this as a nudge to strongly consider trading Barkley in a dynasty league if you have been, hesitant to do so because of how much he's been driving your team this year.
Yeah. The Giants are looking likely to get tackle Evan Neal back this weekend, and Barkley's dip has coincided with Neal being out. I'm not sure if that's part or all of the cause of it, but getting your stud rookie tackle back is definitely going to help Barkley and the rest of the offense.
Not awesome for Barkley that they have Washington twice in the next 3 weeks, but what are you going to do?
Yep.
Darius Slayton at the bottom of wide receiver 3 territory. Anything to be excited about on this front, or is it just I need a wide receiver who might get targets, and Slayton is that?
Yeah, he has 58 plus yards in 5 straight games now. He's averaging 74 yards per game over that span. Washington, though, it was a pass defense we were picking on for the first half of the season. Over the past 5 weeks, they're 7th in Football Outsiders pass defense DVOA. So it's definitely not as good a matchup as maybe the season-long numbers would make it look like for Slayton.
Slayton's, I think his most attractive spot might be underdog pick'ems right now. He's still at 46.5 yards in this week's. He was somewhere in the 40s last week where he went over for us in underdog pick'ems there. So if you're not playing underdog pick'ems yet, you can jump in. You can get your first deposit matched 100% by clicking the link at the bottom of this podcast. I recommend going in. I recommend playing some Darius Slayton. I have to look at his numbers against Stars this week. I don't think he jumped out as as big a play this week as he did last week. But like you said, he's been 58 plus yards in a lot of games recently. So he's a solid bet.
Yeah, we got him for 51. So he's okay. If you're playing underdog. Yep.
Anything else from that game?
No, I'd be careful with Richie James. He delivered last week, but we have 5 games of James without Wan'Dale Robinson this season. He's averaging 4.4 targets in those games. So, very, very low upside, and the floor is not even as safe as you might think.
Yeah. Jets at Minnesota, Vikings by 3, over under 44.5. We've got the great Mike White on one side, and this one definitely benefited from playing his first game of the season against that league worst Bears defense. The Vikings, though, have allowed plenty of quarterback points, including the second most quarterback points over the past 5 weeks. They've also allowed the third most receptions of 20 plus yards. So I'm not overplaying Mike White this week. I think he's somebody to look at if you're in rough shape and looking low in QB2 territory. If you need a second for your super flex league, he's somebody down there that has upside in that. We project him at, I think, 21st right now. But he's one of those guys that only has 1 game of this season behind him. So we don't really have numbers to go on as much as we do other players. So he's certainly capable of outperforming that, especially if we get shootout conditions here. Garrett Wilson is the Jet that I really want to play. The Vikings have allowed the third most receptions of 20 plus yards. Garrett Wilson came back to life with Mike White last week. The targets should be at least decent. So I've got him pretty easily in wide receiver 2 range this week.
Yeah, White, like you said, obviously benefited from the matchup. He was 9th in PFF passing grades last week, so he played well. He did this last year too. I mean, he played well a couple games. His third start, he totally bombed against the Bills. I kind of think that's going to happen eventually this season. We see this with these backup quarterbacks. Like they come in, they have a couple of nice starts, and then the league starts to get tape on them. They kind of start to figure them out, and then there's a crash at some point. But like you said, that crash I don't expect it to come this week in this matchup against the struggling Vikings pass defense. I do think White's a fine 2-quarterback league, super flex league play. I wouldn't mess with him in 1-quarterback leagues. And then Garrett Wilson, I think the only other guy you want to use in this passing game, he had a 29% target share from Mike White last week, and hopefully that rate keeps up because it should.
Love it. I think he's in the range where it's a personal decision between Garrett Wilson and like both 49ers receivers, Juju Smith-Schuster, Terry McLaurin, Josh Palmer. Most of those guys, we'll get to those games in a few minutes.
Yep, agreed.
In the Jets backfield, Michael Carter, no practice Wednesday. I think we should plan at the moment as though he's not playing on his sprained ankle. The Vikings have actually been way better against the run than the pass this year. They started a little rough in that area at the beginning of the season, but since week 5, they're 5th toughest in the league by rushing DVOA. So Zonovan Knight is somebody that a lot of people just learned existed this week, and he's a fine pickup. Just don't overrate his usefulness for this week.
I think he's an RB3 option if Michael Carter is out, just based on volume. I think you could project Knight for 10 to 15 carries and a handful of targets. He basically matched Ty Johnson in pass routes last week, which you like to see. And Knight caught all 3 of his targets. So it's not like he's just going to be the early down guy. And Knight, I didn't write it down. I think he caught 41 passes over his final 2 college season. So, he's a bigger between the tackles guy, but he can catch the football. So that obviously helps too. Again, I think he's a decent fantasy play. If there's no Carter, if Carter's in, I think Carter's the best bet, but I would try to avoid the backfield considering Carter would be playing through that ankle injury.
Yeah, I think it might even be more of an avoid for me if Carter's playing because he'll be on that sprained ankle. And it would be tough to know what the work split's going to be between less than 100% Carter and other guys who were decent last week.
Yep.
Anything sneaky, either good or bad on the Viking side?
No, I'm not like fully trusting Kirk Cousins though, despite his strong game on Thanksgiving. That it was his best game of the season. Season high 81% completion rate. The first time since week 1 that he topped 7.2 yards per attempt in a game. So we'll see if he carries the momentum over, but in this matchup against the Jets are 6th in adjusted points allowed to quarterbacks, 1st in Football Outsiders pass defense DVOA over the past 5 weeks. So Cousins is outside our top 12 quarterbacks for this week.
Yeah, and it would be a difficult decision for me between him and Jared Goff if I had those 2 quarterbacks, just to kind of put some context to it.
Yep, that's the range he belongs in.
Cleveland at Houston, Browns by 7 on the road, over under 47. Obviously, the face of this game is Deshaun Watson for his regular season debut with the Browns. And really, it's going to be more feeling than analysis here. The analysis part, we all know that Deshaun Watson is an excellent quarterback. And that is the only reason that he's on an NFL team right now, because of how good he is. So it's important, I think, to remember just what the Browns gave up to get him. 3 first-round picks and a third-round pick. They gave him the largest guaranteed contract in NFL history. Browns are 4-7 at this point. They probably need to win out to make the playoffs. And we've got Watson making his debut against the only team he's ever played for in the NFL. So we should see plenty of motivation from the player. We should see a team trying its best to win. And, even though he hasn't played it all this year, maybe they lean a bit more run than they plan to beyond that, and especially because it's an opponent they can do that with. But I don't expect them to hide Deshaun Watson after they spent all these draft picks and money on him.
Yeah, I mean, they might even want to, highlight him in this game against his former team. I don't know how it's going to play out. I mean, like you said, we know Watson has been awesome. We know the matchup's good. The Browns at 27 points have the 3rd highest implied total on the week. So that's kind of the stuff working in Watson's favor. Working against Watson, it'll be exactly 700 days on Sunday since Watson played his last NFL game. We saw him once in the preseason. He looked very rusty, completed just 1 of 5 passes for 7 yards. He had to be away from the team altogether until mid-October. He's only been practicing the past couple weeks. That's been all like scout team stuff because Brissett still was taking the first team reps. So Watson will have only had 1 week of practice with the first team offense. So there's a lot of downside here. But again, there is upside because it's Deshaun Watson and because of this matchup.
Right. Most quarterbacks, I'd be like, yeah, well, let's wait and see what happens. But with
Yep.
Deshaun Watson, it's just, one of the best quarterbacks of the current generation of quarterbacks. And he's got Amari Cooper. He's got DPJ. He's got David Njoku. I would not anticipate this being a downgrade for any of those guys. So I would be using them at their normal level. And
Yep.
Njoku, we got back to his full role last week. So it's nice to have him back in what is just otherwise a terrible mix of tight ends.
I hate to break the news to you.
He missed Wednesday.
Njoku suffered a new knee injury in that game.
Oh, it's new?
A new knee injury and did not practice on Wednesday.
I saw that he missed Wednesday's practice. I was just assuming that it was maintenance stuff because it was the same way he started out last week. So yeah, thanks a lot.
Yeah, Stefanski said new knee. I think it's the other knee even. So yeah, he's looking iffy. We'll have to see on that. Yeah, but just going back to Watson, like he's 10th in our quarterback rankings. You can see exactly, where he sits among other guys. I would not start him any higher than where he's ranked. I wouldn't start him over any of the other 9 guys. And then we have like Justin Fields and Tua, who we'll get to in a bit here. Those are the other guys that are right behind Watson that I would not even, be opposed to starting those, quote unquote safer plays over Watson this week.
Now that you told me that about David Njoku, I'm just going to end the podcast right here. I don't care about the other games. Kareem Hunt, bottom of RB3 territory. And I think that's noteworthy because this is one of those matchups where you're like, oh, start all your running backs. You can start both running backs from that team. And Kareem Hunt's good. Hasn't been good lately. Just 7 opportunities in each of his past 3 games and 5 of his past 6. The playing time has stayed there. He's just not getting the ball.
Yeah, Hunt is basically the same as A.J. Dillon this week where, the usage and production hasn't been good, but maybe it happens for him this week. Hunt's actually been at 7 or fewer opportunities in 5 of his last 6 games. The only exception was the blowout win over the Bengals, where he got 11 carries and 4 targets. That's like what you're hoping with in this game. But the Browns, blow Houston out, and in the second half, they get Hunt to double-digit carries. I think it's possible, but there's also still a risk that he only gets 5 carries and a couple targets.
Yeah, in the meantime, Nick Chubb is one of the highlighted players in my free underdog pick'em article that hit the site yesterday. So I already bet the over on him. I would be surprised if he doesn't hit it. His starting line, it might have gone up by now. I'll be surprised if it didn't, because his starting line was below his rushing yardage average for the year so far.
We projected him for 110 rushing yards, which is about as high as we'll project a guy for. But Chubb can go for as many yards as the Browns allow him to go for on Sunday.
Yeah, that's noteworthy for Jared because before maybe this week, definitely before this year, that would have been a number that like I would project for a running back. And he'd be like, nah, we don't project anybody that high. He's going to be 98.5 this week, like an FM station.
Yeah, the triple digit barrier is a tough one to crack. But I mean, the spot doesn't get any better than this.
The Houston offense, meanwhile, switched quarterbacks last week and got even worse. It's coming off its 2 worst DVOA performances of the entire season. Even worse last year with Kyle Allen. If you know anything about DVOA ratings from Football Outsiders, they got a minus 113.1% DVOA with Kyle Allen there last week on the passing side. I mean, it's not getting any worse, and it doesn't matter for Kyle Allen. The wide receivers were not really playing, but it matters for Dameon Pierce, who has been dreadful the past 2 weeks. Not just disappointing, but like team killing performances these past 2 weeks. 1.1 yard per carry over those 2 games, 33 total yards combined between the 2 games, rushing and receiving. And it's not a matter of stacked boxes, Jared. It's been more an issue of yards before contact. So he's not getting the blocking. He's in probably the league's worst offense at this point. Even though it's a positive matchup, I'm scared of Dameon Pierce this week.
I'm scared too. Like, he is not a comfortable start. And like you said, the offense has obviously hurt him. His PFF grades are down across the board too. 3 of his 4 lowest PFF rushing grades have come in these last 3 weeks now. So maybe he's hitting the rookie wall. He has racked up a bunch of touches this season and was not a high volume guy at Florida. I'd have to go back and look, but he might already be at at least his most touches across his NFL and college careers. I'm sure he had more touches in high school. But yeah, I mean, it's a concern now. On the plus side, the guy had been producing consistently for us through the first 9 games of the season on a still bad offense. And he has the matchup this week. The Browns have pretty much been the worst run defense. Football Outsiders does have them as the worst run defense over the last 5 weeks. They're allowing 5.6 yards per carry to running backs. So that's working in Pierce's favor. He sits in RB2 territory in our rankings in a spot where like he's not a must start. There could be teams that have two better running backs, but he's also not a guy I would definitely be sitting because I do still think he's gonna get the volume, and the matchup makes this a potential bounce back spot.
I'm not certain that he gets the volume. That's what I would have bet on the past 2 weeks, but just how poorly they played the past 2 weeks, and now they're 7-point underdogs heading into this one. That's the part that makes me even queasier about it. I tried to mentally move him down our rankings when we first had the numbers, but the guys behind him aren't guys that I definitely believe outperform Dameon Pierce this week. I would start Rachaad White if there's no Leonard Fournette, looking at guys around him in the rankings this week. I will start whoever is Pittsburgh's starting running back, whether it's Najee Harris or Jaylen Warren over Dameon Pierce this week. Otherwise, you're looking at names like Antonio Gibson, Latavius Murray, Jeff Wilson, Cordero Patterson, Miles Sanders, Jamal Williams, Gus Edwards. Like the only one in there, Miles Sanders is a tricky one because the matchup's terrible and I would like to not use him. But if I'm weighing him against Dameon Pierce, I might have to lean toward the Philly offense and just hope that he gets a scoring chance.
Yeah, White I would definitely start over Pierce if there's no Leonard Fournette. We have Fournette projected right now, so White's a bit below Pierce. We'll see how that shakes out. Houston's 20 point implied total is higher than they've been lately, which is probably the Browns matchup, so that helps Dameon Pierce. We also have, it's a minor thing, but Rex Burkhead's probably going to miss this game with his concussion, so maybe Pierce picks up some extra work in the passing game.
Dameon Pierce, by the way, 180 carries right now this season, college season high of 106 as a junior. So well beyond that threshold and certainly more receptions than he had in any college season. So yeah, he's beyond what he's been before and probably getting hit harder by the guys he's playing against. So there is certainly a chance that he has also hit a wall. That whole range of running backs though, like I look at it and I try to order it in my head and there's just no way to comfortably rank it. It's RB17 to RB29 in our PPR rankings. It looks to me, Jared, like this grab bag with like 4 $20 bills and 9 mousetraps in
it. Oh yeah, that's definitely what it is. I just think Pierce is still the safest. It sounds stupid, but I think he's the safest touch bet among those guys because you can't project an NFL team to be as bad as the Texans have been the past 2 weeks. They were bad the first 9 or whatever it was, and Pierce was still producing in fantasy.
Even when you see the white beard on their coach, that doesn't make it easier to project that.
It's Santa Claus's time of year.
I guess that's a good point. Jacksonville at Detroit, Lions by half a point. Who would have guessed that this would be one of the most exciting offensive games on the slate back at the beginning of the year? But it is 51.5 points. Like I said, is the total here. Travis Etienne, fortunately on the Jacksonville side, looks like he's going to play. After last week's game, he downplayed the foot injury. Doug Peterson said he could have come back in, but we were being cautious. Was limited Wednesday, so we'll watch him throughout the week. But we should get Travis Etienne for this game, and I'm certainly not hesitating to play him if he's active.
Yes, that's where I'm at too. Unless we get some Sunday morning report that Etienne's going to be limited or something, which I still wouldn't shock me just because I believe this is the same foot he hurt last year, and he's one of the Jags building blocks, and they're not playing for anything this season. So, we'll have to keep an eye on it. If there's nothing on Etienne being limited, I think you have to start him in this matchup against Detroit.
Christian Kirk is a strong play at this point. He's been somebody that, has kind of wavered between strong play and uneasy play, but limited numbers last week, that kind of hides the fact that he's seen 5 straight games of 7+ targets with 9+ targets in 4 of those, including last week.
Yeah, he was just inefficient last week, but he had 9 targets, a 24% target share. So he's a super safe target bet. Zay Jones, obviously coming off the massive game, which I'm not going to say that type of game was coming, but we've talked about all season that he's been getting nice volume. He just hasn't been super efficient with it. But 7.2 targets per game over the first 9 for Zay Jones, even before last week. Detroit 31st in adjusted points allowed to wide receivers, and it might again be without Jeff Okudah, their top corner, which is the matchup upgrade for Zay Jones because he's been playing most of his snaps on the outside.
Yeah, just don't overrate Zay Jones as a play. Last week marked his career high in targets, catches, and yards. So that's not a game to judge him by. That's like I didn't realize that was possible with Zay Jones, but go in expecting something more like 4.5 to 5 catches for 60 yards.
Yeah, he's still a wide receiver 4 that gets, I think boosted up to wide receiver 3 territory this week because of the matchup.
Evan Ingram is Jacksonville's Greg Dulcich. The playing time is there. The routes are there. The targets are absolutely no guarantee. The matchup is great. So it should be a week we play Evan Ingram. The matchup favored him last week too, though, and it did not work out at all. So I will say I'm playing Evan Ingram over Foster Moreau because of the matchup, but he's a toss-up versus Dawson Knox, and I certainly can't push him any higher than that.
Yeah, I think calling him Dulcich is a bit strong just because we've seen Ingram get targets for more games this season. And like you said, the route rates have it's the fact that the route rates have still been there the past 2 weeks makes me not excited to stick with him, but like I'm willing to stick with him in this matchup. Like we know every tight end outside the top 5 or 6 right now has like a 3-point fantasy floor. Ingram's no different. But again, we've seen him get good target volume in plenty of games this season, and this is just a game we want to get pieces of if we can.
I would love to say, hey, good week to play Evan Ingram. I just can't at this point. It makes me mad.
Yeah, me too.
On the Detroit side, DeAndre Swift got a season-high 8 targets against the Bills last time out. No real change to his role overall, though, so not somebody that I'm trying hard to get into lineup, somebody that I will play if I don't have a better option.
Yeah, I mentioned on Twitter that Swift is off the injury report altogether this week for the first time since week 1. And a lot of people got excited about it. I don't think it means a whole lot. He was a full participant in practice both of the last 2 weeks. And like you said, did not really see his role grow. He's been between a 31 and 34% snap rate in each of the last 3 games, averaging 5.3 carries, 4.7 targets over that span. That's kind of what I'd project on Sunday, but puts him in play as like an RB3 or flex in PPR. But I wouldn't expect more than that.
What you're hoping if you have Swift is that him not being listed on the injury report is a signal that coaches now believe he is ready for a larger role, that injury is fully healed, that we're, at least close to full strength for DeAndre Swift. And I would hope that if that is the feeling among coaches, that we get some kind of signal that that's coming this weekend before it does happen. Ultimately, if I can help it, I would rather wait and see what happens, even though this is an upside matchup. If he does get the ball, we'll see. It's tough to know what to do with Swift right now. Jamal Williams is also tough to know what to do with. To me, Jared, he's just the ultimate gut call. And you hate at this point I don't like to tell people it's a gut decision because we have so many metrics and tools for determining who's the better play. But Jamal Williams is so touchdown reliant, the most touchdown reliant of any of the top 50 running backs. 47.5% of his PPR points have come from touchdowns, which leads the position by a wide margin. He's had 4 straight games of 16 plus carries, so we like that usage. He's been under 3.8 yards per carry in each of those games. He's been under 70 rushing yards each of the past 3 weeks, but he's also scored 5 touchdowns. So if somebody says to me, should I start Jamal Williams? I'm like, I don't know. I mean, probably not if we're not assuming that we can project touchdowns, but I can easily say that. And then he goes out and scores twice. It would be like the 6th time this season that he did that.
Yeah, I mean, I do think he's at least one of the 10 best touchdown bets at running back this week. I mean, he's been doing it. This game has the big over-under. The Lions have a nice implied total. And so Williams is leading the league with 13 rushing touchdowns. He also has 11.1 expected rushing touchdowns just based on his usage. That's 2.5 more than anyone else. And there's luck involved in that too. Like every time I turn on a Lions game, I see someone getting tackled at the 1-yard line, and then in comes Jamal Williams to punch it in. Like there's luck involved, but he's clearly their guy at the goal line. Not only their running back of choice at the goal line, but like they want to run it in. When they're inside the 5, they're running the football. So yeah, he's gonna hurt you if he doesn't score. But this isn't a game where I'd say he's a bad bet to score a touchdown. I think it's going to be a high scoring game. The Lions are at home where they've played better this season. I do think if you've been rolling with Williams for the past, however many weeks, I would keep rolling with him this week for sure.
Our friend Doc Budoff asked about starting Jamal Williams or Gabe Davis, which is a question because of, Gabe plays tonight. And to me, it's like that's one of those where I'm like, that's really a question for you because they're both like, he could do absolutely nothing or he could score 3 times and neither one of those would be outlandish.
Yeah, Doc's just setting you up to get burnt there because either of those guys could outscore the other by like 20 points, and it would not be a surprise.
I will give him credit that he's one of the few people who, if I do tell him one and it's wrong, he won't be like, "Thanks a lot, Schauf."
That's nice.
The Jacksonville defense, by the way, has played the run a lot tougher than the pass. They're 11th in rush DVOA for the season. They're 29th against the pass. They've played the run especially tougher lately. So, it doesn't favor, but like you said, this is a Detroit team that wants to run it. That split could at least help Jared Goff, who is averaging nearly 70 more passing yards per game in losses versus wins. He's averaging 0.4 more yards per attempt in losses than wins. So it's not just a volume thing. I would guess that he's a little bit more likely to throw the ball downfield if they're coming from behind. Now, the question is, can Jacksonville get a lead here? I think we've just watched Jacksonville play better over the past couple weeks, but these are very similar teams where I wouldn't be surprised with really any game flow among these two.
Yeah, I'm with you there. I mean, Goff hasn't had a good fantasy game since week 4. Quarterback 15 is his best finish in fantasy points since week 4. That's because Williams has taken all the touchdowns. So, if the touchdown luck swings in Goff's favor, he can deliver. But, he's not a guy I'd be looking to, start this week in this matchup. I don't trust the touchdowns to go his way.
Not somebody I'm looking to start, but somebody I think like Mike White with upside. If you're in Superflex, if you're looking deep in a deep league for a starting quarterback, somebody with upside because of the situation.
Yep.
Anybody else from this game?
No, that's it.
Tennessee at Philadelphia, Eagles by 5.5, over under 44.5. And Derrick Henry needs this one to be a get right spot. It's like Saquon Barkley in that we can't really do anything about it. We're not sitting Derrick Henry, but he's coming off 3 straight games of 3.1 yards per carry or less. And none of those 3 opponents ranked better than 16th in run defense DVOA. So it's not coming off of tough matchups. It's just Tennessee not running the ball well. Philly hasn't played the run well, so maybe it's a get right spot for him.
Yeah, 2 of Henry's 3 worst PFF rushing grades of the season have come over the past 3 weeks as well. His playing time is down. He's been under 60% of Tennessee's offensive snaps in 3 of the last 4 games. He was at 64+% in every game prior to that, besides the blowout loss to Buffalo. His carries are down. Now they're down from 23.7 per game to 20.3 per game over the last 4. So it's not like he's not getting the ball. He still made that big play on the screen pass last week. So I don't think he's wearing down. I think it's probably just more like tiny sample size noise at this point. And like you said, you're not benching Derrick Henry. We'll see if he can bounce back.
Yeah, he does get the second best remaining schedule by our adjusted fantasy points allowed. So, that's another check mark in favor of keeping him in the lineup and not worrying too much. Otherwise, on Tennessee, I think the only other guy worth talking about is Treylon Burks. If you need an upside wide receiver 4, he's the guy. Eagles opponents are passing at a rate well under expected, though. So you might look at this and think, oh, Tennessee's going to get beat up. They'll throw the ball more. Treylon Burks is going to be an upside guy. Maybe that happens, but it's really not a situation that makes Burks that attractive an option.
Yeah, 6, 8, and 6 targets for Burks in his 3 games back from injury. I think that's kind of the range he's going to settle in. I think, like you said, it puts him in play as a wide receiver 3. Eagles secondary is, they've been missing their slot corner, Avonte Maddox. They're missing Chauncey Gardner-Johnson this week too, who plays mostly safety, has been helping fill in for Maddox in the slot as well. Burks has run about 20% of his routes from the slot this season. So it's a slight matchup upgrade for him, but just a matchup upgrade for Tennessee's passing game in general.
And certainly losing the league leader in interceptions can only help the vulnerability of the deep pass defense. So yeah, a little bit of a mark in Burks' favor if you do need somebody from that range. Seattle at the Rams, Seahawks by 7.5, over under 41 here. And talked about some other running back issues, Jared. Kenneth Walker is worth highlighting on that front. 3 games of 2.8 yards per carry or less among his past 4. Each of those 3 found him getting less than 2 yards before contact per carry. His other 3 games is lead back. He's got 6 of those total. The other 3 games, all at 2.3 or better. So Kenneth Walker needs to get those yards before contact if he's going to have a good game. I would be a little worried about this matchup and pushing for him to move down our ranking some, but the Rams are not going to have Aaron Donald. And not only does that hurt the defense, I'm not sure we even know how much that hurts the defense because he has never lost a game to injury before.
Yeah, I mean, you don't get defensive injuries more impactful than that. Seahawks pretty big favorites in this game, so they should be able to feed Kenneth Walker. I'm not too worried. He just, I think he's going to be like this throughout his career. He's kind of Saquon Barkley-ish in that he's like a boom bust runner where he's going to go, 0 yards, 2 yards, lose a yard, then he's going to break off a 30-yarder. I think that's just kind of the type of runner he is. His usage is fine. He's still dominating touches in the Seahawks backfield. I think Walker's fine. I wouldn't be surprised if he bounces back with a pretty big game this weekend.
Geno Smith and his wide receivers are every weekers at this point. Nothing scary for them against the Rams. And then on the Rams side of this, I'm not touching anything on the offense.
Ideally not. I did want to bring up the Seahawks defense, which I can't figure out because they were horrible the first 4 or 5 weeks, and they were really good. They have two of their 3 worst performances by DVOA have come in the last 2 games. The loss to the Bucs prior to the bye, and then last week versus the Raiders, and they were just horrible. And that doesn't mean a whole lot this week because, like you said, you don't want to start anyone on this Rams offense, but it's definitely something to keep an eye on going forward.
Yeah, I didn't look. I know through the context of Cody Barton, their linebacker, just for IDP purposes, that when he plays more, the defense is worse, and not just because of how bad Cody Barton is, but because of how they're aligning things. It's more 2 linebacker sets when he's on the field, and then it was more 3 safety or multi-corner sets when they came out with better defensive ratings. So I didn't look further to see exactly who's injured. I know Ryan Neal, one of the safeties, is dealing with an injury this week, to see if that's going to impact who's on the field, because it doesn't matter for this week against the Rams, but certainly something to look at heading into next week and beyond.
Yeah, let me at least mention, though, Kyron Williams, who played 71% of the Rams offensive snaps last week, got 11 carries and 3 targets. He's an option if you're hurting at running back. He's in low end RB3 range in our rankings this week.
Miami at San Francisco, 49ers by 3.5, over under 46.5. On Miami's side, left tackle Teron Armstead looks iffy for this week. Didn't practice Wednesday, left Sunday's game early. Jeff Wilson Jr., though, not on the injury report Wednesday, so positive for him after he was in and out of a disappointing game on Sunday. Much worse matchup for Wilson this week against San Francisco, especially if his left tackle's missing.
Yeah, this is such a fascinating matchup. Obviously, Mike McDaniel facing Kyle Shanahan, who he coached under the past few seasons. Bad timing for Armstead to likely be out. Austin Jackson, Miami's right tackle, is also going to miss this game. And Miami has a 21.25 point implied total. Like that, that's scary. You're not benching Tyreek Hill or Jalen Waddle, but Tua sits lower in our rankings this week than he has for a while. And I do think there are guys like, Trevor Lawrence, I would start over Tua without really thinking twice about it this week.
Yeah, Trevor Lawrence I feel good about, but what's the case beyond that for being down on Tua this week?
The matchup, the offensive line injuries, the implied total. I wouldn't be surprised if Tua and Mike McDaniel figure out a way to scheme around it and still have a nice offensive game. But there's a lot of causes for concern with Tua this week.
Yeah, he's still inside our top 12. I think I'm not playing him over Geno Smith if I have that decision to make. We talked about Trevor Lawrence. He's way up the rankings this week. The guys that might be decisions, I think, are Deshaun Watson, Dak Prescott, Justin Fields. I think Dak is a safer play. Might not have the ultimate ceiling of Tua, but I would lean that way for safety. Watson and Fields, Watson would be a tough one. I would probably lean Tua just because there is still plenty of unknown with Watson and the Browns. Fields, the injury, I guess that's one I would have to wait until the weekend to see which way I would go between them, because it matters obviously not only that he's active, but it matters, just how close he is to full strength.
Yeah, I'm with you across the board there. I think definitely Trevor Lawrence, definitely Geno Smith over Tua. I'd probably lean Dak Prescott over Tua, and then Fields Watson. That's just the projections don't really tell the whole story with those guys, so it's kind of just got to be a feel thing.
Yeah, I agree with that. Raheem Mostert might be back for this game to further challenge Jeff Wilson Jr. We'll watch him. He was limited Wednesday. Anything else from the offense?
Nope.
On the 49ers side, the target shares are down for both Deebo Samuel and George Kittle since Christian McCaffrey arrived, Jerry. We were talking about that offline this morning. They've been up significantly for Brandon Ayuk over the same stretch. I'm not sure. That's one of those things to be aware of overall. I'm not sure just how much they matter for this specific matchup because it's so good for passing, and the backfield lost Elijah Mitchell, and Christian McCaffrey's dealing with a knee issue. So we might just get a 49ers offense that leans pass a little bit more than usual this week.
Yeah, I mean, the McCaffrey knee thing, probably the biggest fantasy storyline of the week. He did not practice on Wednesday, which isn't a major surprise. Shanahan kind of said they're going to limit him throughout the week. I think McCaffrey's going to play on Sunday. The question then becomes, how big of a workload does he get? His snap rates have been down. In the game prior to the bye, McCaffrey's second with the Niners, he played like 82% of the Niners offensive snaps. He's been like in the mid 60s the 3 games since. I'm not exactly sure when the knee issue started. And all the Twitter doctors are saying it's knee tendonitis, just based on the little strap McCaffrey had under that left knee during last week's game. And that tends to be like a pain management, load management kind of thing, more than like an injury that's really going to sideline him. But it's definitely something that could, force the Niners to limit his snaps, maybe limit his touches a bit. So, you're, again, like we said, a lot of these backs, you're not benching McCaffrey unless you're stacked, but he definitely might not be the like top 3 fantasy option that we kind of thought he would be when he first arrived in San Francisco.
Yeah, we'll certainly keep watching him as we get closer to the weekend. Jimmy Garoppolo, full practice Wednesday, which is noteworthy because he hurt a knee in that game, downplayed it afterwards. So we weren't expecting it to be anything big, but good that he started the week with a full practice. There's some shootout potential here for this one. We talked down a little bit about Tua, but the Dolphins have scored a bunch of points. It would not be shocking if this game is one of the higher scoring on the slate this week. So, with all of that wrapped together, maybe we get a little bit more Garoppolo than we do in most games. I think I would have him maybe a spot or 2 higher than where we have him in the rankings right now. It's really, though, it's tough between him and Derek Carr, especially if you just look at their situations overall. Derek Carr's game has a higher total. Jimmy Garoppolo's team has a higher total. So it's kind of a coin flip. And then we get up into that Tua, Fields, Watson range.
Right. Yeah. I mean, Garoppolo came in pretty dang close to Tua in our projections this week. And I wouldn't be surprised if, Garoppolo outscores Tua in this game. Like you said, the Niners do have the way higher implied total, much better matchup for Garoppolo. Maybe not as quite explosive weapons for Garoppolo, but pretty close. So I do think Jimmy G, I would not start him over Tua, but I do think he's a good streaming option this week.
Yes, I agree with both of those things. Anything else in that game?
No.
Kansas City at Cincinnati. We've got the Chiefs by 2, over under 52.5. Cincinnati looks even versus the run and the pass on defense if you look at the ratings, but the pass defense, as we've mentioned on the show before, has been much worse since their top corner Chidobe Awuzie went down. They also just posted their best run defense DVOA rating of the entire season against Derrick Henry last week. So this looks like a spot for a Chiefs offense that would generally rather pass anyway. It looks like a spot for them to lean pass, a little bit less Isaiah Pacheco, a little bit more Patrick Mahomes plus everyone.
Yeah, with you there. Then the Chiefs did go pass heavy as usual in their 2 meetings with the Bengals last year. I'd expect that to be the case this year. Questions on the Chiefs side. Jerick McKinnon did not practice on Wednesday with a knee injury. He has 6+ targets in 3 of the last 4 games now. So I don't know how the Chiefs would replace his role, his pass catching role, if he's not available for this game. Because we know Clyde Edwards-Helaire is also out. So it's Isaiah Pacheco, Ronald Jones, not a pass catcher. And they did add Melvin Gordon to the practice squad yesterday or on Tuesday. So we'll see how that shakes out. And then the other question here, Juju Smith-Schuster was limited coming off the concussion, which we don't tend to see. Usually guys clear the concussion protocol and they're back to their usual roles. Juju played just 44%, or he ran her out on just 44% of the pass plays last week. I'd expect him to be back to his full workload on Sunday, but no, that's definitely something worth watching.
Yeah, I think that we'd probably see like Noah Gray factor into the replacement plan. It's tough to judge with so many injured parts here on this Chiefs defense. This is going to be one that we have to watch into the weekend. It's, it's just a game and a team where if it's close, we probably lean toward the upside of the situation.
Yeah, I'm with you. I think McKinnon's targets would not go to the other running backs. They go to Travis Kelce, the other tight ends, maybe the wide receivers. I'd just be curious to see who at least plays those passing snaps in the Chiefs backfield.
Yeah, I think whereas plenty of other running backs are schemed into the offense, and I know that the Chiefs like to screen, but I think it's a little bit more of an outlet than a part of the offensive plan going in. Cincinnati side, it looks like we should get Jamar Chase back. We'll have to watch. He said last week that he was the one who made the call not to play against Tennessee, and he said, even though he said he was feeling good, he said, we'll see about the game as we get closer to the weekend. He's not only thinking about how he feels right now, but long-term not wanting to do more damage to the injured hip. So we'll watch him into the weekend, but if he's active, let's assume that he's ready to go. If you read too, I read a thread on his injury, like how it played out as it was happening. And he was producing like beyond when he actually suffered the injury. After he was having trouble walking, he was like, I don't know how I played the second half. Adrenaline took over. I was having trouble walking at halftime. And then, I just got excited and scored 2 touchdowns. It's like, Jamar Chase, tough not to play if he's in the game.
Yes. Yeah, you're starting him if he's active on Sunday.
If he is in there, I'm not particularly interested in Tyler Boyd. I think he's in the wide receiver 4 mix if you're looking down there, but in the range of guys like Darius Slayton and Treylon Burks, and less good as a target share bet than those 2 guys.
Yeah, I think the argument in favor of Boyd is just this game in general. We expect it to be one of the highest scoring games potentially of the entire season. So there's upside to everyone. And Boyd's he saw slightly more targets without Chase the past 4 weeks, but he was more productive everywhere else. Catches, yards, touchdowns, even expected fantasy points were higher with Chase on the field than without him. So I'm not saying Chase returning good news for Boyd, but I also don't think it's bad news just because the offense gets more efficient in general.
Yeah, it doesn't crush him, but I don't think that it's good news. He's a little bit more neutral, and there's a little bit less room for him to have a high target game with both of those guys healthy. We did have T. Higgins missing some time early in the season when we had some of those better Tyler Boyd games. Hayden Hurst is well within our top 12 at tight end at this point, even with Jamar Chase back. I think I mentioned it on the Monday pod, but one of those, like, Jamar Chase being out did not significantly impact how much Hurst was on the field or how much he was targeted either. His number was up last week, but otherwise it's been pretty solid throughout the season.
Yeah, Hurst, another guy who more targets per game and more expected fantasy points per game with Jamar Chase over the first, 7 games of the season than without him. So, yeah, he's fine, and you're playing him just because of this game environment.
Mm-hmm. And then Joe Mixon looks like he'll be back this week from the concussion. We'll watch to confirm, but it certainly seems that way at this point.
Yep, limited practice on Wednesday for Mixon, so he still has a bit of work to do, but he should be good to go by Sunday. And I would expect him back in the same role he was prior to the concussion.
Yeah, I agree. Getting all the touches and then losing the 1 touchdown receiving to Samaje Perine that pisses us all off.
Yep.
Chargers at Raiders. Chargers by 1.5, over under 50.5. The Chargers are I think you're playing anyone in strong consideration because of the matchup. They're tied with the Lions for the 4th highest team total on the slate. We're going to watch Mike Williams to see if he'll play. I think you plan at this point as though he's not going to be available.
Yeah, Williams did not practice on Wednesday, so yeah, I would plan on not having him. I think the fringy guys here, DeAndre Carter, who's obviously coming off the big week, week 12, 7 catches, 73 yards and a score on 10 targets. That's a ceiling game. You can't expect that for Carter going forward. He had averaged 5 targets and 3.8 catches over his previous 4 games. And the nice thing about Carter is, with Mike Williams out, he's been running a route on 85+% of the Chargers pass plays. And we know this is a high volume passing game. So like with these fringe wide receiver options, like, wide receiver 4 types, Carter's like a better bet for pass routes than all of them. So that's kind of what's working in his favor. And you have this matchup against the Raiders, who are the worst wide receiver defense.
Yeah, near identical to Tyler Boyd in our rankings right now. That's how I would treat him. They're basically the same guy. They're in somewhat crowded pass offenses, but also offenses that can be very efficient throwing the ball and can go pass heavy and just have enough production for everybody involved. I'd play both of those guys over Sky Moore, probably over Mac Hollins, although that one's a little bit closer for me.
Yes, I would too.
On the Raiders side of this one, the big story is Josh Jacobs' calf injury, which apparently propelled him to 200 and whatever yards last week. All I know is I'm going to be pouring rum next to Joe Boo every day until we get Josh Jacobs active for this game.
Yeah, I'm calling BS. Was that Pelissero that had the tweet that like he's going to be managed throughout the week and he hopes to play on Sunday? He suffered the calf injury last Friday, goes out and does what he did against Seattle. And then he was limited in Wednesday's practice. Like if he's seriously in doubt, they're not going to put him on the field to do anything on Wednesday. So I mean, we'll keep an eye on it, but I would plan on Jacobs playing in this game.
Hey, all I know is watching somebody go for an 86-yard run makes my calf sore, so I can understand.
Yeah.
Foster Moreau, I would love to not use him. I think the case for using him is pretty easy to understand, though.
Yeah. Yeah. In week 11, his routes were way down. He blocked for some reason, but he was back up to an 88% route rate last week. He's averaged 5.6 targets in games without Darren Waller this season. So, that's good enough to make him a fringe option at tight end.
And I gotta look up Joey Bosa. Like, I haven't heard anything about Joey Bosa. Okay, the latest on him is that he's not close to a return, and that matters for whether Foster Moreau is blocking or running routes, because without Joey Bosa, it's not that scary a pass rush. So we should get plenty of routes. We'll get plenty of, maybe not plenty, we'll get inefficient targets, but in the range where he's at tight end, like, that's all you need is targets.
Yes, exactly.
Derek Carr, as we mentioned earlier, toss up with Jimmy Garoppolo, QB1 fringe. Like I said, the Raiders have a higher game total. The 49ers have a higher team total. We've got Watson, Tua, Justin Fields just above those guys. I'd play those three over Carr or Garoppolo, but anybody in that range is a solid to strong option.
Yeah, Carr's been getting it done for fantasy lately. He's finished exactly quarterback 10 in 3 of his last 4 games, and he was quarterback 15 in the other game. So, I mean, I don't think he's played particularly well this season, and this isn't an offense I really want to bet on, but like the fantasy points have been there for Carr lately. And again, this should be a high scoring game, and the Chargers defense has not been good lately.
Yeah, you feel a little bit better about betting against the Chargers defense than you do betting on the Raiders offense.
Yes, exactly.
Indianapolis at Dallas, Cowboys by 11, over under 43.5. I mean, Michael Pittman and Jonathan Taylor are in play. I would not be looking beyond that too much. Paris Campbell is in play, but kind of in that unexciting wide receiver range that we've talked about with Tyler Boyd and, some of the other guys. I don't even remember the names right there because I'm so unexcited about it.
Yeah, all the Campbell targets went to Jelani Woods on Monday night. And Woods, we should talk about. I mean, I think he's worth adding where he's available. In deeper leagues and FFPC leagues, I would not trust him yet. Kylan Granson did not play in that game on Monday night. I think that was at least part of the reason Woods broke out. And then again, I mean, I could see him, maintaining this lead role the rest of the way because the Colts don't have anything to play for because he is their, rookie tight end. Maybe they kind of want to see what he can do down the stretch. So would not use Woods this week, but definitely worth grabbing if you don't have, one of the locked in starters at tight end.
It's well worth noting, though, too, that the Colts offense has not had a lead tight end role, like for somebody to definitely secure. So, is it possible that he keeps operating like this? Sure. But the way that the season has gone, it's much more likely that he does absolutely nothing for us going forward.
I agree. Yep.
And nobody else for me to talk about on the Colts side. Dallas side, obvious guys are in. We've talked about the Colts defense being tougher against the run. It's not to the point where it's altering my plan for either Tony Pollard or Zeke Elliott, who continued to split work last week.
Yeah. Zeke obviously had the bigger game last week, but I thought it was encouraging. Tony Pollard out-snapped Zeke Elliott and actually out-carried him 18-16. So, if Pollard's going to continue to get that level of work, I think he's a guy you're going to want to be starting most weeks. The other guy in the Cowboys, Michael Gallup, who I thought had just not looked like himself for most of the season, coming off that late season ACL last year. I thought, Thanksgiving was easily his best game of the season. He easily had his best PFF grade of the season last week. So he's someone to definitely grab if he's available. I think he might be a guy who, is in the wide receiver 3 mix the rest of the way if he's, back closer to 100% now.
He's somebody I'm going to have a tough time playing at this point in the year when he just hit 50 yards for the first time this season, hasn't topped 63, and is like, even peak Michael Gallup is still going to be somebody that's like 18% target share, not really a red zone option. So he's, a Gabriel Davis type of producer anywhere, where big boom bust week to week. So I'm fine with adding him. He's somebody that I wouldn't feel like needed to be added if he's sitting there on the waiver wire, though, if I don't have a comfy drop for him.
Yep. I don't think he's going to be a league winner, but I definitely think he could be helpful down the stretch.
Yeah, I can agree with that. New Orleans at Tampa Bay, Buccaneers by 4, over under 40.5 to close us out on Monday night. And before we get to Tom Brady's fears of the Saints, we'll start with Alvin Kamara, who's scaring fantasy owners at this point. We've talked about plenty of other big name running backs with, cold stretches that are leaving us with decisions we didn't think we'd have to make at this point. And you wouldn't think early in the season that come week 13, you got to decide whether to play Alvin Kamara, but his averages over the past 4 games, 9 carries, 27.8 rushing yards, 5 targets, 4 catches, 8.4 yards per catch is like the one reason to keep playing him, because It gives him 33.8 yards per game receiving over that span, about 60 total yards per game, saving the rushing stuff. So all told, I think it's fair where we have Kamara this week in RB2 range, but he's one of those guys that, you know, if you're looking at your roster early in the season, you're like, okay, week 13, I've got this stud, I'm playing him. He's not that stud right now. He's somebody that's fine to use, but also fine to sit if you're in really good shape at running back.
Yeah, the Saints have the worst rushing offense over the last 5 weeks per Football Outsiders DVOA. And like you mentioned, 3.2 yards per carry for Kamara over that span. And it's not a huge deal, but Mark Ingram's return does matter a little bit. Kamara was up at 88, 79, 70% of the snaps the previous 3 games. Ingram comes back last week and Kamara's down to 67% of the snaps, which is still a good number, but it's not the elite mark he was at without Mark Ingram. The receiving stuff does keep him in play. 6 targets per game over his last 5 catches per game over that span. That's what's keeping him up there in like high end RB2 territory in PPR leagues. Obviously, he loses quite a bit of value in half PPR and non PPR.
Yeah, Bucks are seventh toughest on running back scoring, 9th in run defense DVOA. So not as tough a rushing matchup as it was in recent seasons, but still a tough one that certainly doesn't help Kamara this week. Who else is worth talking through on the New Orleans side?
I think on the Saints side, it's Chris Olave. 23% target share over the past 3 games with Jarvis Landry, which isn't where he was before Landry returned, but that's still a decent enough number. I think you're starting Chris Olave in most spots. And I mentioned it last week. It didn't hit last week, but the Saints have obviously made it a point to get Taysom Hill more involved lately. He has his 2 highest raw snap counts and snap rates over the past 2 weeks. He has 15 carries, 3 targets, and has thrown 4 passes over that span. So, it's interesting. He's another, guy to consider if you don't have one of those, top 5 or 6 tight ends.
Yeah. I mean, it's all not a guarantee that he's going to produce anything because he's not a traditional tight end, but it helps his chances of doing something. And we've seen what the ultimate spikes can be for him.
Yep.
On the Bucs side, after leaning the run much more than usual against Seattle and Germany, they went back to the pass last week against Cleveland, despite a matchup that should have favored running, if anything. They went 67-33 pass run. The Browns are 2nd worst in the league in run DVOA, and they actually were 1st worst heading into that game. So the Bucs helped them come down from 32nd to 31st in that category. So we should expect them to continue throwing the ball, even though Tom Brady only averaged 5.7 yards per attempt in that game. His 6.5 yards per attempt for the season are his worst since 2002. So things haven't been going great, but they're still leaning that way. Now comes his nemesis since he joined the Buccaneers. He had 53% completions against the Saints in week 2, 190 passing yards, 1 touchdown in 6 meetings with the Saints since joining the Bucs. That includes 1 playoff game. Brady's got 59% completion, 6.2 yards per attempt, 9 touchdowns, 8 interceptions. He's finished QB 26 or worse in 3 of 5 regular season meetings. And the 2 where he didn't, he had a rushing touchdown in 1, which propelled him to QB 9. And the other one was a game where he was so bad, 3 early turnovers that they fell way behind, had to go 76% pass. And he ended up getting there in a game that they still lost by like 9. He threw for 375 and 4 touchdowns by the end of the game.
Yeah, and the Saints pass defense is playing well coming into this game. They're 8th in Football Outsiders pass defense DVOA over the past 5 weeks. They just really limited a Niners offense that had been hot coming into last week. So it's not do you want to bench Brady this week? It's like, how many guys are you playing over him? I mean, I think in most leagues you can find someone that we have ranked higher. I mean, Derek Carr, I'm definitely playing over Brady this week. I'm playing Garoppolo over Tom Brady. I'm playing Aaron Rodgers over Tom Brady. I would imagine, that one of those guys is available in most fantasy leagues out there.
It's the matchup this week and the way he's playing. It's to the point where I'm not sure that I would tell somebody to play Mike White or Jared Goff. But if somebody said to me, is it crazy for me to play Jared Goff or Mike White over Tom Brady this week? I'd be like, no, it's not crazy. I'm not sure that I would be able to get there in my own lineup, but it's not crazy at all. I wouldn't be at all surprised if both of those guys outscore Tom Brady this week.
Not crazy. I'll give you that.
Marshawn Lattimore looks like he's trending toward playing. What to see. We've got 1 practice report so far, but he hasn't played since week 5, so that would only further help the pass defense here. And in his career, he has owned Mike Evans. Evans is averaging 44.8 receiving yards per game in his matchups with Marshawn Lattimore, a median of 48 yards in those games. That's why we've got Mike Evans down at wide receiver 25. So it's not a sit Mike Evans week, but it's a you might have better options than Mike Evans week.
Yeah, not a must sit, but not a must start either. That's a pretty big sample we have of Lattimore shutting Evans. I know Lattimore is coming off the injury, so I don't know what that means exactly. And Evans has scored some touchdowns in those games against the Saints, so he can still deliver a decent fantasy day. But he definitely deserves a matchup downgrade this week.
And a lot of times, if we downgrade one receiver, it's like, okay, well, where are those numbers going? For me, I'm not pushing those numbers to anybody else this week, except maybe like a slight boost to Chris Godwin, who I'm already playing anyway, so it doesn't matter.
Right. Yeah. Godwin 7th in our PPR rankings. You're starting him. Sounds like Russell Gage got back to practice this week. So, if he played, that would definitely take Julio Jones out of the mix.
Yeah. So I think these guys, if you're playing a showdown for this game, that makes, one of those guys more interesting. For regular season-long lineup setting, I would certainly try not to use those guys. And the last one that we have to watch is Leonard Fournette. No injury report yet as we're talking, because it is Thursday afternoon and they're playing Monday night. So the first one will come out this later Thursday afternoon.
Yeah, and if Fournette plays, like, we're just guessing at what the backfield's going to look like. We saw it turn into something close to a 50-50 split even before Fournette went down prior to the bye week. Rachaad White had a pretty nice game as Tampa's lead back last week, and I would not be shocked if Fournette plays, if Rachaad White leads the backfield in touches. I consider both those guys like low end RB2, high end RB3s if Fournette plays.
Yeah, they started Rachaad White in that game against Seattle in Germany. So clearly they already wanted to elevate his role even before the hip injury for Fournette. And I mean, even if Fournette's back playing, that hip should be, a reason to maybe lean a little bit more White's way, especially if they already wanted to get him the ball more. So yeah, I like White this week. Love him if Leonard Fournette's out, and we'll see where that situation is heading into the weekend.
Yep.
That's going to do it for this week 13 preview edition of the podcast. Head to draftsharks.com now. You can see exactly how we project all these guys with explanations on why. And I think it's important to note the difference between projections and rankings, because not only do we have the rankings on the site that we talked about, how all these guys slot next to each other, but not all scoring systems are the same. So we've also got my team or team intel pages in there now to show you exactly who you should start for your specific team, following whatever scoring rules you put in there. And it's got the free agent finder right next to it, so you can quickly see if there's anybody available in your league who is a better option than you have lined up to start right now. You can click the links at the bottom of this podcast post, wherever you're getting it, to get into Underdog, to get into Sleeper. You can get your first deposit matched 100% up to $100 on both of those sites. So if your redraft stuff's not going great, or if you're just down to one team and you need something else to do, you can get into the over-unders. You can get into the daily drafting on both of those sites. We're going to give you some free money to do so. For Jared Smola and the rest of the Draft Sharks crew, I'm Matt Schaff saying thanks so much for swimming with us.